Friday, March 31st, 2023, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today, we're going to look at the bankers. Have they got a 100-year plan to take over the world? And by taking over the world, I mean controlling all the major assets and controlling all your activities through something like a CBDC. That's what we're going to look at today. It sounds conspiratorial, but I think it's a question we need to ask ourselves, especially when there's so much out there proving that there might be. I like to make an announcement before I start. I've noticed that we're getting a lot of bots of late, only in the last 24 hours or so. And what do I mean by that? Well, they're trolls or bots, whatever you want to call them, impersonating me, using my thumbnail, and responding to your comments in the comment section and saying, send me a message, and providing a WhatsApp number. Just wanted to say that I never give out emails, WhatsApp numbers, Telegram addresses. I don't have a Telegram account, and I certainly don't use my WhatsApp to communicate with you. It's more of a private thing. So yes, don't reply to it. Try to report it. Ignore it. It's not me. And I like to say as well to all of you out there who have questions for me, who watch me either on YouTube or other platforms that I post on, I'd love to answer each of your questions separately, but it's really hard because thanks to you, I get so many viewers now, so many people interested in what I have to say. Maybe 6 years ago it was easier. What I would say, if you really want me to answer a question that I haven't, is to think about joining my Patreon account. That's what I use it for. And for as little as $1 a month, you could have access to my Patreon to ask me questions, and I will respond definitely your Patreon questions. So, conspiracy theory or fact, the bankers' 100-year plan. Why do I say 100 years? Well, you probably heard of Agenda 2030. So if you go back 100 years from 2030, you go back to 1930. And what's it got to do with banking? Well, I'll show you what it's got to do with banking. Here we go. Constituent Charter of the Bank for International Settlements as of 20th of January 1930. So let's go through this charter so you can see who's behind the Bank for International Settlements. It's quite amazing because this bank is also supposed to be the regulator of the too big to fail banks. So, whereas the power signatory to the Hague Agreement of January 1930 have adopted a plan which contemplates the founding by the central banks of Belgium, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, and Japan, and by a financial institution of the United States of America, of an international bank to be called the Bank for International Settlements. So don't forget, all those central banks there in Europe at the time were private banks, and you'll see which banks from America actually invested in the Bank for International Settlements. Yes, they own this bank. And whereas the said central banks and the banking group, including Messrs. J.P. Morgan and Company of New York, the First National Bank of New York, well, that's become Citibank, right? First National Bank. That's the Rockefeller Bank, J.P. Morgan Bank, and the First National Bank of Chicago have undertaken to found the said bank and have guaranteed or arranged for the guarantee of the subscription of its authorized capital amounting to 500 million Swiss francs, equal to 145 161,290.32 grams of fine gold, that barbarous relic, right? The bankers know what money is, divided into to have 200,000 shares. And whereas the Swiss federal government has entered into a treaty with the governments of Germany, Belgium, France, Great Britain, Italy, and Japan, whereby the said federal government has agreed to grant the present constituent charter of the Bank for International Settlements, and not to repeal, amend, or supplement the said charter, and not to sanction amendments to the statutes of the bank referred to in paragraph 4 of the present charter, except in agreement with the said powers. So this is very important, because what this means is that the Bank for International Settlements, which is headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, is actually a supranational international institution owned by the private bankers. That means that it's a bit like the Vatican or Washington, D.C., or the City of London. It's got immunity from prosecution. It's above Swiss laws. It has its own little country there. Of course, for criminal offenses, I think that's different. But one thing I've always known is that the head of the major central banks that founded the BIS, so at the time the Fed wasn't involved, but it might as well have been the New York Fed, because those banks there own the New York Fed and also the Chicago Fed. The Bank of England, the ECB, and the other major central banks, their heads go every other month to the BIS, and they travel with a diplomatic passport issued by the BIS, so they can carry whatever they want to and from the BIS, and they're not dealing as, let's say, Jay Powell when he goes there. He's not dealing as the Fed chairman. He's dealing as a member, someone who works for the BIS. That's how they do it. And isn't it ironic that the bankers regulate themselves? Because the BIS created something called the Financial Stability Board, which is supposed to regulate and set the standards for the too big to fail banks. But if you look at who really owns these, the BIS, it's a farce, right? So Basel 1, 2, 3, and 4, it's just another mechanism to extract wealth from you, from the general public. So what was the original purpose of the BIS? Well, you just have to go back to the history here. And it says, and this is from their website, Foundation of the BIS. The BIS was created in the context of the Young Plan, adopted on 20th January 1930 at the Hague Conference, a convention respecting the establishment of the BIS in Switzerland was signed on the same date between the governments of Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom, and on the one hand, and Switzerland on the other. They forgot to mention the private U.S. banks. The Young Plan was intended to settle once and for all the question of reparation payments imposed on Germany, and to a lesser extent on other Central European countries, by the Treaty of Versailles following the First World War. The BIS was set up to take over the functions previously performed by the Agent General for Reparations. So all these reparations, that has been, how can I say, settled. It's been almost 100 years, well, about 85 years, really, since the end of World War II. Why do we need the BIS? Well, because, as you see here, they talk about foundation and crisis, right? The bankers always love their crises that they foment so that they can do things that normally they couldn't. So Why do I think they have a 100-year plan? Well, there are always clues out there, and you have to be really awake to their plan and awake to what they're saying, and they say it in plain sight. And I've just put this together here, two and two together, about the BIS. And this is a very good book I'm going to recommend in a minute. The BIS, David Rockefeller, the central banks, the fact that the first national city bank of New York is an owner of the BIS. Well, that's Citibank now, Citigroup, Rockefeller Bank, JP Morgan. So if you go to the quote, famous quote, if you know a little bit about David Rockefeller that he made, I think in his memoirs, and this is what he said: "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government." Yeah, this was, I think, in 1990. "The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers." So supranational, BIS, world bankers, "is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." David Rockefeller. I mean, you can decide for yourself whether there is a plan to take over the world, a 100-year plan. And how do they do that? I mean, how can they do that? Well, it's very simple. If you control the currency and the money of all the major countries, and if you meet regularly with no spotlight from the media, if you're above the law with your diplomatic passport, it's easy. It's fairly easy, right? So that's what I think. So what can we do to stop this? We've got about, 7 years? Well, keep exposing them. It's not just enough to end the Fed or even end the Bank of England or the ECB. This bank, the Bank for International Settlements, needs to be ended as well. It can only be done by an international treaty of the countries that created it. We have to abolish it. So, yeah, The Tower of Basel by Adam Lebor. I highly recommend this book. You might be able to find a free PDF. If not, have a look online. So it says the shadowy history of the secret bank that runs the world. I'll just go through what it says here in the inside jacket. Tower of Basel is the first investigative history of the world's most secretive global financial institution. Based on extensive archival research in Switzerland, Britain, and the United States, and in-depth interviews with key decision makers, including Paul Volcker, the former chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Sir Mervyn King, governor of the Bank of England, former governor, and former senior Bank for International Settlements managers and officials. Tower of Basel tells the inside story of the Bank for International Settlements, the central banker's own bank, owned by the private bankers, I would say. Created by the governors of the Bank of England and the Reichsbank in 1930 and protected by an international treaty, the BIS and its assets are legally beyond reach of any government or jurisdiction. There you go. And it's not just the Bank of England and the Reichsbank that own it, but also JP Morgan, now through the Fed, of course, JP Morgan, Citibank, they own the New York Fed, of course. The bank is untouchable. Swiss authorities have no jurisdiction over the bank or its premises. The BIS has just 140 customers, but made tax-free profits of 1.17 billion in 2011, 2012. Oh, that's the other thing. All the people that work there for the BIS, they don't pay any tax. A lot of people that work for the national central banks, they go there on secondment, it's called, and work there for a few years. So that's how it works. It's a big club, and we're not part of it. Since its creation, the bank has been at the heart of global events, well, I would say crises, but has often gone unnoticed. Under Thomas McKittrick, the bank's American president, from 1940 to 1946, the BIS was open for business throughout the Second World War, yes, and it dealt with both sides. The BIS accepted looted Nazi gold, conducted foreign exchange deals for the Reichsbank, and was used by both the Allies and the Axis powers as a secret contact point to keep the channels of international finance open. Yet you can't have a major war if the bankers aren't doing business, right? And they win no matter who wins. They're fully hedged. After 1945, the BIS, still behind the scenes for decades, provided the necessary technical administrative support for the Trans-European Currency Project. From the first attempts to harmonize exchange rates in the late 1940s to the launch of the euro in 2002, it now stands at the center of efforts to build a new global financial and regulatory architecture, once again proving that it has the power to shape the financial rules of our world. Well, the bankers have that. Yes, despite its pivotal role in financial and political history the last century and during the current economic crisis, the BIS has remained largely unknown until now. So I highly recommend this book. You will see how some people, some countries try to have it abolished after World War II when they found out that it was dealing for both sides. But there was a guy called John Maynard Keynes who represented the British, who didn't want the BIS abolished because he was probably involved in it. He was probably lobbying for the owners, the British owners of the BIS. And you also see a chapter where they talk about when the BIS, the Bank of England, helped the Germans loot gold from Czechoslovakia. Yes, the Bank of England, the BIS, and the Reichsbank, just before the start of World War I. So there you go. I think there is a plan to take over the world. And it looks like if it was a 100-year plan, it's going pretty much on schedule. But let's hope that it fails. So with that, let's quickly look at where the markets are this morning. We're a little later today, Rudy and I. It's 10 to 9 a.m. London. Spot gold did fairly well yesterday. I think we traded almost up to just below 1990. Overnight, we've been up to 1985. And right now, we're actually near the lows at 1975. We're down about $5. Silver as well. Got very close to 24 yesterday, and overnight as well we got to 23.98. Right now it's at 23.72. It's down about 18 cents. Dow futures is down 30. Nasdaq is unchanged, and so is the S&P future. So very quiet here so far. The stock markets. The currencies, we got sterling down 0.2 at 123.64. The euro is down 0.25%, 108.80, and the dollar is up 1/3 versus the yen, 133.12. And the dollar is unchanged versus the Chinese yuan at 687.40. Aussie dollar is down 0.5% at 66.75. The dollar is up 0.25% versus the Canadian dollar, 135.57. And the Kiwi dollar is down 0.2 at 62.50. To the general commodities, we got platinum trading at around $9.85, is down about $5. WTI crude is down 1/3%, 74.10. Brent is down 0.5% at 78.13. And high-grade copper has come off a bit overnight. It's down 1.5% at 403.30. Let's finish off with the Treasury market, with the bond market. The 2-year yield is up 5 basis points at 4.15. The 10-year is up 2 at 3.57. And let's quickly look at the UK government bond market, the gilts. The 2-year yield is up 7 basis points at 3.52. And the 10-year is up 8 at 3.59. So there you go. With that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day and also a very good weekend. Take care. Bye.